Is this anxiety or something worse? If you're dealing with these mysterious physical symptoms, you might be getting repeat panic attacks, you might be getting scary, intrusive thoughts, and you might be feeling disconnected. But what if this isn't anxiety? What if this is something way worse? What if the doctors are missing something? Well, in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 ways to know for sure if what you're dealing with is anxiety. So let's get started. Now, the first way to know for sure is if you experienced all this from a panic attack. Often what happens is people might have had a history with some anxiety, with some nervousness, or they may have not really been struggling with that at all. But their journey started when they had their first panic attack. Now, you and I use the word panic attack all the time. However, when you do experience a panic attack, you'll notice it's very different than the general verbiage we use in everyday language. And so what happens is these anxiety sufferers experience what truly is a panic attack, and it's terrifying. The fact that they had their panic attack, deep down they know it could almost happen anywhere. Right? You can't run away from your body. You can't run away from a panic attack. And so what happens is that people experience this by having their first panic attack. Now, we often think when you have a panic attack, it starts and stops, right? You have a panic attack and then it stops and then you go back to normal. That's at least what we're told, or at least that's what we assume is the case. What we often don't talk about is something happens after you experience your first panic attack. What happens is that when you experience a panic attack, your nervous system becomes more sensitive. What happens is that your body has this innate fight or flight response designed to protect you from threats. We basically have this stress response to protect us from danger. Oftentimes the danger was predatory. And so what happens is that when you experience a panic attack, your body is gearing into this survival mode. It's basically saying there's danger, danger, danger. Something that's interesting that happens is anxiety sufferers will experience this alarm system and say, hey, there is no threat. There is no tiger out to get me. And so what happens is that when the alarm system turns off, meaning when the panic attack subsides, your body is now primed for survival. Basically, it's saying, hey, there was danger before, so what's going to happen is that we're going to be on high alert in case we see danger again. You don't go back to baseline. Your nervous system becomes more sensitive. It basically starts looking at your environment and everything going on and looking at it from a survival standpoint. It's looking at everything as a potential threat. What happens is that when people have their first panic attack, they start experiencing weird symptoms. They just might feel a little bit off. They might feel agitated. I was experiencing digestive issues. I was getting some other symptoms. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. And so the different ways it manifests, I describe it in about 5 different ways. First is you have a panic attack, right? And so what happens is when anxiety sufferers don't know what's happening and they're naturally fearful of what's happened, well, they'll experience more panic attacks. They will also experience intense physical symptoms. This could be dizziness, nausea, vertigo, digestive issues like I had. It can be an array of symptoms and it can be happening all the time. And an anxiety sufferer doesn't know what's happening. It's very easy to think that there's something medically wrong. The other is you get a lot of scary thoughts. Thoughts that you could normally brush off in the past. Now all of a sudden the thoughts come and it has this emotional punch. It's almost like you can't even shake it off. Your mind just latches onto these thoughts and it just keeps repeating it. The next is that you start feeling disconnected. This can be feelings of derealization where you feel like nothing is real. The world doesn't feel real. It feels like you're almost in a simulation in many ways. Or you can experience depersonalization, which is this out-of-body experience. And then next is you get weird, bizarre emotions. You might be feeling numbness. You might be feeling a sense of impending doom. You might be getting irritated, agitated quicker. And so what happens is that if you start experiencing all these things, especially after a panic attack, what you're dealing with is anxiety. So that's the first way to know if what you were dealing with anxiety, if this all started with a panic attack. Now, if you want to know the mechanics of anxiety, exactly how to come out of this, I'm not going to be sharing that in this video, but if you want to know more, I'll put a link down below for the desensitization blueprint. Now, here's the second way to know if you are dealing with anxiety. And this one's very simple. You go to your doctors and you get everything ruled out. Your doctors do a series of tests trying to identify what's happening. And if you notice your doctor says that what you have is anxiety, or they really don't have an answer for what you're dealing with. They say everything is fine, your tests are good. Then what you are experiencing is anxiety. Anxiety is what we call a default diagnosis. Basically, your doctor gets a full assessment of how you're doing and they don't find anything wrong and they say you're healthy, then the default diagnosis is anxiety. Medicine is so advanced, it's able to detect things with such precision that if you've gone to your doctors and they've just said there's nothing there, or they can't find anything, or they say it's anxiety, trust them. Another way you can look at it is if you don't want to use the term anxiety, you can just say your nervous system is sensitized. And you'll eventually look at this in the future and be like, I'm so glad it was anxiety. I'm glad it wasn't anything, medically serious. Because if you know that it's anxiety, well, the good news is that you can overcome it. The third way to know is by going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Psychologists and psychiatrists are the only people that can diagnose if you're dealing with a disorder. You could go to a general therapist, but they can't diagnose it officially as a disorder. They can look at your symptoms and say, yeah, that sounds like you're dealing with a panic disorder, you're dealing with an anxiety disorder. But if you really want to know, and if you're just going above and beyond, go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Now, something important to understand that if you go to a psychiatrist, 9 times out of 10, if you are dealing with anxiety, they're going to prescribe you medication. Psychiatrists come from the medical branch. Their specialty is in medication. So one of the ways that they help is by prescribing medication. Psychologists, on the other hand, won't prescribe medication because they're not allowed to, but they focus on treatment plans like CBT, ERP, which is a form of CBT, ACT. They'll have these different modalities to help. But if you want to make sure that what you're dealing with is anxiety and you've gone to your doctors, going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist just to make sure. And what happens is with people that we are helping on the recovery journey, their psychiatrist or psychologist will diagnose them with a few things. It will be a panic disorder, a generalized anxiety disorder, health anxiety, agoraphobia, OCD. These are all anxiety-based conditions. And so if you've been diagnosed with one or more of these, don't think that you have 5 or 10 different problems. At the end of the day, it's just a sensitized nervous system manifesting in different ways. The next way to know if you are truly experiencing anxiety is that your symptoms shift. Anxiety in itself is a shapeshifter. And one of the most frustrating things about dealing with anxiety is nothing makes sense. There is no pattern. You'll wake up and your symptoms will subside and you'll wonder, what did I do to make it subside? You'll have other situations where you feel like your anxiety should be subsiding, but your anxiety is flaring up and you're experiencing all these symptoms. It could be showing up as vision changes, but then it shows up as feeling disconnected or having brain fog. And you're having all these systemic symptoms and you can't figure it out. No matter how much you try to focus on each symptom, trying to figure out what rhyme or reason is making it happen, you can't find an answer. So it's important to understand that if your symptoms are shifting, well, then it's anxiety. We even have a term for that, which is called somatic shifting. Soma is body, shifting is these symptoms are changing. Your nervous system is never static. And so as your nervous system is readjusting itself all the time, it will show up as manifestations of different symptoms. And a lot of times what happens is anxiety sufferers are trying to figure out what's happening based on their symptoms. This is why one of the things I mentioned is getting everything rolled out by your doctor. Your doctor will take your symptoms into consideration, but they will look at tests to identify what's going on. If you are just following your feelings, if you're just following your symptoms, you'll be in this hamster wheel. You'll never know why you're experiencing these symptoms. A big key to recovery is recognizing that you can't follow your feelings, you can't follow your symptoms. You have to follow a roadmap to recovery. You have to focus on desensitizing your nervous system and, basically the principles we share in the blueprint. And number 5, you've dealt with lifestyle adjustments, but you're still experiencing symptoms. What happens is that when people are struggling with anxiety, they'll go to their doctors. The doctors won't say much. They might just give them medication, and that's about it. They might go to therapists. They might have tried all these things, and it doesn't really work. They might try childhood trauma stuff. They might try talk therapy. None of it really works. Then what they try to do is they try to do lifestyle adjustments. They'll try to change their diet. They'll start exercising. They'll start doing breathing techniques. They'll do all these things to make their symptoms go away. They'll basically do whatever they can, but they're still not finding relief. If you're doing lifestyle adjustments and it's still not working, well, the good news is that what you're dealing with, again, is a nervous system sensitization issue. Lifestyle adjustments are good for lifestyle, but in terms of overcoming these symptoms, they don't have much of an effect. So those are the 5 ways. Now, before I get into the 6th way to know for sure, this one is a little bit tricky, and I was a little bit hesitant about sharing this in this video because it can lead to people self-diagnosing and stuff like that. But I want to really break it down because I do think it's important, and there is a subset of people dealing with anxiety that deal with this issue that should be addressed. But that being said, don't use this as an excuse to throw everything under the anxiety umbrella. Always make sure you're getting things rolled out by your doctor. But the 6th way to know for sure is that if you've been diagnosed with a default disorder or a default issue that the doctors can't do much about. So here's what I mean. A lot of times when we're helping people on the anxiety recovery journey, they are diagnosed with different things like fibromyalgia, things like IBS, things like a vestibular issue. And when you ask them, okay, well, what can you do to make this go away? They say, well, the doctors say there's not much I can do. I can just learn to live or manage with it. That there is a stress component to it. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that if you've been diagnosed with that, for example, I had been diagnosed with IBS. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm dealing with anxiety, but I'm also dealing with IBS. I didn't recognize that IBS was also a default diagnosis that was part of your nervous system being sensitized. Nervous system sensitization doesn't only apply to anxiety. It can happen with food intolerances. It can happen with people that are dealing with fibromyalgia, people that are dealing with chronic fatigue. So if you've been diagnosed with these things, if your doctor has a treatment plan, do the treatment plan, but also recognize that you might be also dealing with a nervous system sensitization issue. This is a little bit tricky because you don't want to self-diagnose. Again, the idea is that you work in partnership with your doctor, right? If your doctor has a treatment plan, do it. And if you find relief in it, great. But if you don't find the same amount of relief, then you can also throw it under the nervous system sensitization umbrella. And you can focus on desensitizing your nervous system, and what will happen is that the symptoms go away. Now, if you want to know more about how anxiety can create these physical symptoms that are so bizarre, that are so mysterious, make sure to check out this upcoming video that shows you what are some of the most common symptoms caused by anxiety.